Bundle up and mark your calendars because Blue Door's signature event is back. Join us on February 22nd for Blue Door's Coldest Night of the Year Richmond Hill fundraising walk sponsored by Home Trust. This is more than just a 2 or 5 kilometer walk. It's a chance to come together and make a difference. You can register, sponsor, volunteer, and fundraise in support of vulnerable individuals experiencing hunger, hurt, and homelessness in your community. For event details, visit cnoy.org/Richmond Hill. Let's change the tune for people in need because it's cold out there. Together, we can make a difference. See you on February 22nd.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome, Housers, to another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite, from the great team at Blue Door. My team does amazing work in the areas of York, Durham, Peel regions, just north in the GTA. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. We're doing stuff. We put 500 people through into the trades to build the housing we desperately need, not desperately building. And as well, we do all sorts of pieces in housing services, from emergency to supportive housing. Recently, we just had our groundbreaking where we're taking down a little home, big piece of land. We're putting up 14 stack townhomes. Incredible project, and hopefully one of many to come. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. You see the incredible work that over 130 people on my team at Blue Door are doing. But let's get to today's guest and what we do here. And we are so lucky to have week after week so many brilliant people in this field come on and talk to us about the work they're doing in this sector. It gives me great hope, right? I mean, I nerd out over this stuff all the time. If you're a nerd like me, or maybe you're just not a nerd, but you're interested, and you have an idea for a podcast for us, for On the Way Home, of guests, maybe it's you. Reach out at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. If you have any constructive criticism about the pod, if you have questions, if you have ideas, reach out to me at any time. Would love to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening. We've got a great listenership from the sector and really contributing. We've had international guests on where we find that we're more alike than we are different, and things that happen in different parts of the world can be applied here, and similarly in Canada to across the world. Let's get to today's guest. I am so happy this week to welcome Pedro Barata, who's the CEO and president of Habitat for Humanity Canada. I knew Pedro in his time at the United Way of Greater Toronto. He was incredible there. He's got a brilliant policy mind. Then he did Future Skills, which was really cool. We were involved with that with Construct, and he was really involved in helping so many social enterprises kind of get off the ground and work, and put young people to work in great environments. And just recently, 5 months ago, he came back into the housing fold. He as the CEO of Habitat Canada, and it's so cool to have him on. We talk about his journey into this work, and he talks about, as a new Canadian coming into this country, all the way to the work that he's doing now. We talk about what is Habitat. I think everyone thinks of our grandfather's Habitat, and they know of it, but not exactly sure what it does. And what does Habitat Canada do? What is the role of Habitat Canada? We talk about some of the challenges happening in the sector right now, and the challenges for Habitat for Humanity. Recently in the GTA saying, they can support people with a household income of $100,000 to get home ownership. And Pedro talks about, trying to stick to your mission and your base, but also, recognizing that the cost of the affordability of housing is shot way up, and all the challenges around that. We talk about their third annual survey, just kind of a pulse check, as Pedro puts it, for Canadians around housing and affordable housing and ownership. We talk about what has to change. We talk about also there's a partnership with CHRA, CAEH, Habitat, CREA, I think one other group too, where they've really come up with some big ideas that could really, make a major dent in preventing homelessness across Canada and creating affordability. So we talk a little bit about that, and I think we'll have someone on Ray Sullivan from CHRA or Tim Richter or others involved come on to talk about that as well. And we talk about, lastly, his hopes for the future for Habitat. He's a fascinating guy, a true leader. I'm so pumped to have him on and have him back in the sector. Let's go to that conversation now. Pedro Barata, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I am pumped to have you on.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So good to reconnect.
Just so listeners, so you know, Pedro's been part of the sector in one way or another for many years. He's going to tell us about that. I don't want to steal his thunder, but has recently come back in kind of the housing end of things. And we're really pumped to have a leader of his caliber come back at a time where we really need leaders of his caliber. Before we get to that, we always ask the question to all our guests, because it's very personal to each one. And that is, what does home mean to you?
Yeah, well, it's that peace and that feeling of stability, and also a sense of belonging. As you were talking about my return to this part of the sector. I remember saying actually during my job interview that this feels a little bit like coming home, which is a different meaning, right, of the word. It's not about sort of the bricks and mortar. But it's very much about that sense of belonging and of purpose and connection. So that's what home's all about. Home is having a safe, peaceful place where you can come home to your loved ones and your little pets. But it's also about the spaces where we build community and where we find shared purpose, and hopefully make some wonderful things happen.
Knowing you just a little bit over the years, you're a real community guy too. Like, you reside, I think, in Toronto, and you love, like, when I see your posts, and it's all about community and different things you're doing in the community with your family, I believe with your dog too, right? You have a dog?
Oh yeah, a little chilly.
So yeah, thank you for that. I was always saying, like, I was whining. I was in Ottawa last week, and I don't really like to travel anymore. I find that, like, I used to be excited about little trips, and now I'm like, oh, I got to leave home. And why is that? Because home just has that comfort piece, right, where you feel your best self. Let's talk a little bit about, I brush on it, but can you tell me a little bit more about your journey? How did you get started? And just walk us
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. So my immigrant experience when I was in my sort of mid-teens was just a really important marker for me, really important moment, and just the experience of sort of leaving everything that behind and just moving to a new place with not a whole lot to go along with with the plane ticket. That's just something that stays with you, and something that for me has been a real anchoring experience. Not necessarily because of the trip, but because of how things sort of evolved positively from there. So I was lucky that 13, immigrated from Portugal, went to Winnipeg as our first home. And just got really, really lucky in that I went to a fantastic inner city school. The majority of the student population were Indigenous kids, my cohort, and I never met an Indigenous person before, and they became my buddies. And the school and I learned so much, and the school was like really inclusive and just right for young people going through transitions, including myself. And that really helped me out, really anchored me. The public education system is actually always been, I never went to great schools, or schools that were not known as being great, but they were great in many other ways, and that they had very caring people who watched out for youngsters going through transitions in their lives, and to be able to count on that is it's so key. It's so key for so many of us, as our just having growing up in a loving household, which is like also really, really important. And also I've often reflected on how critical it was for my parents to come at, sort of like at that stage in their lives, to learn new careers, but to be able to find like good jobs, right? To be able to be a newcomer and find, my father found a career in the trades, unionized with benefits, right? Paid really, really well. He was able to build another chapter of his life, and those opportunities are harder to come by these days. And so I reflected on that. And then by the time I got to university, there's a lot going on, right? There was a lot going on in sort of the early to mid 90s. We were, just like peaking on a recession. It was terrible economically. Governments were moving from the cap to CHST age, right? When billions of dollars were taken out of transfers to the provinces for many of the social supports, and we're still living that transition. The Harris government was just coming online, and those of us who lived through that remember what that was like. And being in university, it was also when transitions were happening from primarily grants to primarily loans. So a lot of the change that was happening at the systemic level and at the individual level, just in terms of, trying to get through school and just watching the labor market kind of bottom out, all of that sort of led me to want to get more involved in organizations that were, doing community organizing around social assistance reform, for example. Workfare was just coming on. I remember one of my first volunteer gigs was Daily Bread, because it just felt like the right thing to do. So that just led me to, want to be really engaged in how systems were being structured, how community was being built, and to find opportunities to have a stake in that and to help shape it, and to be with others who also cared enough, right, to dedicate time outside of just class time to try and build a better world that worked for all of us. And that led me, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. Back when I was in university, there were only a couple of policy schools, and they were far away from home. And so I ended up doing a master's in social work at U of T, because that was one of the few places where you could actually focus on policy, on social policy. And that was great. It got me my bearings. I got my bearings around policy and the sector. And I got my first job was actually at Campaign 2000, the Ontario coordinator of Campaign 2000. It was a 3 days a week, 6-month contract. And I thought I died and went to heaven, right? To be able to score like a gig like that, right? Doing Campaign 2000, social research, network of partners. I was the Ontario coordinator, network of partners across the province, at a time when there was a lot of stuff going on provincially on social assistance and income security and lack of childcare and lack of housing. So that was great. And then, eventually, and I counted this, Michael, in anticipation of this conversation. This September that just passed marked 25 years since I got that job at Campaign 2000, which is like 25 years. Wow, time flies when you're having fun. And through that time, I also got to work at the Atkinson Foundation, through some fabulous work there. I spent almost a decade at United Way. I was my previous job at Toronto Metropolitan University, leading a startup on future skills called the Future Skills Center, which is an amazing experience. But to be back in this housing space now, when it really feels like ground zero for a lot of the challenges that Canada is facing, but also a lot of the solutions that need to be put in place, and to be in this unique position, working with 45 affiliates across the country, being part of this ecosystem that's trying to figure out how we move forward in some very challenging times. It's amazing. It's how lucky to be in this position, and what a responsibility, right? To take it on and to make sure that that we use these few opportunities that we have in these roles to continue to make sure, that the arc of history always moves toward progress, right?
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and like fascinating journey through. And I said off air, I mean, to you, I was so glad, when you see different, like they said, pleased to announce I'm going to be, actually, I don't think I think it came from Habitat first because you being so humble, then you had to put something out. But I'm like, man, does that ever make sense? Like, what a perfect choice. It just to be that voice, and for Habitat Canada to have you. I think is a perfect fit. Let's talk a little bit about Habitat Canada. I think people generally think they know what Habitat for Humanity is, and we've had wonderful people like Ian and Josh Bernard on here talking about Habitat GTA. But let's talk about what is the role of Habitat Canada? How long has it been around? What are some of the things you work on?
Yeah. Habitat is like so many other organizations in the not-for-profit charity world. It's like well known, but not necessarily known well. I mean, I think the first thing I'll mention about Habitat is that Canadian presence with 45 affiliates, every province and territory, working from the ground up, very grassroots based. But it's also an organization that's in 80 countries. And that global aspect of our mission to make sure that everyone has a safe, affordable place to call home is really, really critical, because that international work, that global work, it connects us to an international movement. It teaches us all kinds of things, right? Like there's so many different approaches in different parts of the world. At any point in time, different countries, different jurisdictions will be facing serious challenges, right? Be it, just because of climate change or because of economics, or they'll be facing, opportunities because of, public policy or government priorities. And I am just starting to really learn and see all of the incredible learning opportunities that exist within this ecosystem, and how we're connected, right? We're connected by mission. We're all doing it in our own way. But we can share so much with each other. And I've already had an opportunity to visit some of my counterparts, for example, in Honduras, as well as in Romania. And there's incredible work over there that we can contribute to, but that we can also draw lessons from. In Canada, our main mandate is to provide affordable home ownership opportunities for low and modest income families, with a priority on families with children who otherwise would not get that opportunity to get their foot in the market. And we work with sponsors, donors, community partners, volunteers, with governments increasingly, side by side, with the individuals and families who are homeowners, to create those doors to opportunity, and to make sure that the math works on the mortgage, that we take care of down payment, that we also create the right wraparounds around families, and everything from financial literacy to just ensuring that we're providing whatever supports the families need as they take on this opportunity, and frankly this responsibility as well. We're also increasingly getting into the space of repairs as well, which is really, really important. It's one of the it's one of those like sort of quiet but such important issues when it comes to affordable housing. We keep talking about like how many new homes are we going to build? How many new homes are we going to build? And that becomes the KPI. But we forget that the vast majority of affordable housing is here now, and it's aging, right? And it needs to be upkept, and holding on to that stock, especially stock that was built decades ago, and not losing it is as important as continuing to build new homes. And so being in that space of repairs is really, really key. And we're increasingly in a space that, Michael, you also know very, very well, which is to tangibly provide pathways to the trades for young people, and particularly young people facing barriers. We're lucky in that we have real live construction sites all over the country, and those provide real life opportunities for young people to learn skills, just general skills in terms of work, but also to learn trade skills. So yeah, our work is far ranging. At the end of the day, it's all about handing those keys over so that a family has an opportunity to own a home, to build some equity, and build a great future.
Yes, and for many, many years, so many people have realized the right to housing through your programs, right? Through Habitat. I mean, Habitat's brand is so strong. People think of 90-plus-year-old, former President Jimmy Carter, being affiliated with that and hitting some nails into, and people do community builds, and that raises thousands of dollars. It gets people real hands-on involvement for years. But Habitat's changed, right, over time. I mean, like we all do, and now there's a bit of pushback because, with the focus being on ownership, I heard someone last week said now, they're looking at families with a household income of $100,000, a year in the GTA. This is right, but I don't think that. I mean, to me, that's not shocking at all. And $100,000, although it's a great household income, don't get me wrong, it's not what like if you look at the scale of what it used to be over time. That's just kind of how it is. Can you talk about some of the challenges some of the habitats are facing with the rising cost of housing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real issue. I mean, it's a real issue in that, we live in a context, we can't ignore that context, and the math around home ownership has to work at the end of the day. And with costs being so high and so many families just struggling to pay the bills, it does mean that that the tradition that the habitat family in some markets like the GTA is not necessarily the traditional family perhaps at the lower end, and that's a challenge for us, right? Because I mean, that's at the core of our mission. We can't move away from that. We're going through a period of transition right now to figure out how is it that we change alongside with the reality that families are facing. But we have to create that continuum and that balance, right? And to do that, we're going to have to continue to pivot. And what I've learned is that through the 40 years of Habitat, there have been many forks on the road, including on mortgage models. And Habitat has continued to change with the times. So right now, one of the biggest pushes is around not simply building one home at a time, but really looking more at scale, right? And how is it that we can use economies of scale to look at townhouses, condos, right? I was just in Peterborough. They just they broke ground. They didn't break ground. They actually had the opening ceremony for a 51 unit condo that actually does the full range of income bands, right? And uses the condo model to try and address some of those issues around how we're getting pulled into higher and higher on the income scale. And how is it that we can use some of those economies of scale to actually create opportunities for everybody? We're also increasingly looking at building entire neighborhood, or being part of building entire neighborhoods alongside private developers and not-for-profits. Waterloo just announced what will be the biggest ever habitat development in that community, and that's at a scale that again will allow us to look at how is it that we integrate maybe multi-generational families, right, living in one home, with also bigger homes for families, for larger families, and also different income bands. We're also increasingly looking at partnerships with government as a way to address some of these challenges, right? At the end of the day, you have to build in a market where you've got development charges, you've got interest rates, you've got all of the building costs, and governments are increasingly really critical in terms of ensuring that affordability can be a reality. So we are in the midst of a partnership with CMHC that has been very helpful in ensuring that we can build and we can subsidize the building so that we get affordability in the end. We're also in markets like in the GTA, looking at how is it that we're not doing the building ourselves, right? But we're actually working with developers to purchase units in condos, for example, and provide inclusive opportunities for families to own affordably in a larger condo, for example. We've also diversified our revenue sources, and restores. We have over 100 restores now across Canada, and those are really important revenue generators for Habitat, and that model has really allowed us to continue to push forward on the affordability front. I've mentioned repairs. Repairs are also another way that we're looking at how we use our building expertise to be able, for example, to work with municipalities and ensure that the stock of social housing is maintained. And how is it that we can be in that business of ensuring ongoing state of repair in social not-for-profit housing. We're also working with Indigenous communities on building partnerships. In places like Hamilton and Grey Bruce, we've actually partnered with First Nations to build homes and to be, the sort of a building partner of choice for First Nations. We're very proud of that, and it's a win-win in terms of what we're all trying to do. And we got to keep pushing ourselves. We have to keep innovating. One of the issues that we're looking at right now is the reality that for the next generation of Gen X, Gen Z, the reality of home ownership is increasingly out of reach. And there's like, unless you have rich parents, there's almost a sense of resignation that this is just the way it is. And unfortunately, the market is just not providing any real at-scale solutions to solve this intergenerational home ownership challenge. So one of the things that we are looking at Habitat is that we know how to build affordably. We know how to work with governments. We know how to work with families. We know how to provide a product that doesn't require the same levels of profits, right, for the builder. And so how is it that we start to explore how we can perhaps be part of the solution in providing some ways into the market for the next generation, and to fill a market need, and figure out how we bring some Habitat ingenuity into providing some solutions. And if we could do that, and we're going to be doing some experimentation to see if the model works, if we can bring some new thinking and some new solutions into that sort of like market gap. And if that works, not immediately, but eventually, that could become a way for us to get back to how you started this question, which is how is it that we ensure that we stay anchored on our core mission to serve low, modest, moderate income households, and can we actually use sort of new approaches in terms of who we're working with to cross subsidize the kind of building that we do. So now's not the time to it's that thing that when you can't go back, you have to go forward. You have to try new things. You have to take risks, and you have to be prepared to learn from them, and to learn from, build on what works, and of course also refine based on what doesn't.
Well, I mean, I hear from you like incredible creativity, innovation across, and I think we're all facing that. And what kind of partnerships can we do to have multiple wins? And in the GTA, Blue Doors work with habitat, and we think, okay, so if we take our construct program, right, and our trainees go and do work on a habitat home, and so they're getting real life experience. Habitat is actually giving people real life experience, and now as part of preventing people from experiencing homelessness, or working on those sites, we're building homes for people who desperately need affordable home. Like, so there's multiple wins, right? And you're doing that. You talked about, right, around, hey, that's okay. Like, we're looking at a bigger build where, there's going to be a big market component of that will pay for the nonprofit. And that's what we have to do to get it done. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need housing types of all kinds. And why not have a real solid business model, as you're talking about? Now let's switch. We'll switch a little bit to some of the work that you're doing. You have just completed your third annual affordable housing survey. How did this come? Like, tell me a little bit about the survey and the process. What happens?
So third annual, it's a bit of a pulse check on how Canadians are feeling about just their housing situation in general, but especially around affordable home ownership. We've worked with Leger. It's a survey of about 1,500 Canadians across the country. And it's really, it's really us continuing to ensure that we understand our relevance and how our work is connected to Canadians. The reality is that I think it's really important for organizations like ours, like we operate in, or we're part of a context when there's so much information. Everything is so complex. Everything can be so fragmented. And it's really important, if we're going to remain relevant, that we don't just stay in the safety of our bubble, right? And that we continue to get outside. We continue to get outside of our own space and outside of the people who already love us and who we already know, and we continue to ask questions, and we continue to listen, right, to what's coming back. So that's really, really key. The survey gives us a point in time, again, pulse check on how Canadians are feeling about home ownership. It's also it's a free service to governments and policymakers, frankly. As any of us who are following this file, we've seen that there's been appropriately a lot of attention to housing and significant investment. And that investment has been disproportionately focused on purpose-built rental. We have a lot of catching up to do. So absolutely, that's the space where policy attention is required. But I would also observe that at the same time, governments kind of, took their eye off of the home ownership side, and especially the affordable home ownership side. And so, checking in with Canadians and seeing what they think, right? And sort of like holding up a mirror to how policies are being framed and whether they align with where Canadians are at, is just, a service that we're happy to provide to policymakers at all levels of government.
And what were some of the key findings that have come out of this? What are you learning? Were there any surprises too?
It's not surprising that most Canadians, and upwards of 80% of Canadians who answered our survey, describe home ownership as a luxury, and as something which is increasingly impossible. Which is, it's not shocking, unfortunately, right? That this is the space that we've arrived. But to be able to just, put a number on the magnitude of that mindset, and really take a step back and confront that reality, and ask again, is that okay? Is that okay that, like, most people, right, 4 out of 5 Canadians actually think, owning a home is now impossible. It's a luxury. It's not going to happen anymore. And so that's, it's a tragedy, frankly. At the same time, that we also hear that most Canadians, even though they see it as increasingly out of reach, they also see it as something they really believe in, and something that they wish more of us could do. And so, When Canadians talk about home ownership, they connect it to economic stability. They connect it to mental health and well-being, and it's like it's again, it's tragic how many Canadians in our survey talked about how just paying the bills is impacting on their mental health. Beyond that, also, there's a deep understanding about how home ownership is connected to intergenerational equity and to the fact that, wherever you sit in terms of your generational cohort, it's the younger you are, the further you are from the possibility of home ownership. And we're hearing, in our survey, we heard from Gen Z especially, who are now making choices about delaying family formation, having fewer children, and even moving away from where they want to live, where they have, sort of their work contacts and their friendships and their emotional supports, and just having to move away from that, not by choice, simply because of the cost of housing and how difficult it is to afford a home. And in our survey, there's also a clear connection between, strong middle class and the ability of Canadians to afford a home. And, it's just, owning a home is a symbol and it's a signal that if you work hard, you do all the right things, that you can make it. And what does making it mean? Making it means that you get your foot in that housing market, and you buy your first home, and you build equity, and you build your family, and you plant some roots. And so that, I think that's a both an economic but also an existential challenge in terms of how we see Canada and how we see Canada's resilience and strength in terms of our middle class. And I mean, the other thing about the survey, which is really important, is that Canadians want more action of all kinds, and they see that the place to start really is on taxes and fees that really get in the way of building more affordable housing. And for us, I mean, that certainly resonates. Like our current priority right now with the federal government is to really get the federal government to remove the GST from affordable home builds. The feds have already done exactly that when it comes to purpose-built rental, student housing, nonprofits, and we're waiting for the federal government to do the right thing and extend that GST cut to affordable home ownership. And that's exactly, I think, what Canadians are expecting as well.
Amazing work, and we'll get to where people could take a look at that survey as well. You do a lot of great work with Habitat, but you also are part of a larger group. You do a lot of stuff in partnership, coming together, and recently, so you're part of a group where CHRA, CAEH, CREA, and others, and you come together and said, hey, if we're going to take some real big swings, if we're going to really get this thing done, these are the things that we have to do. These are the dollars attached to it. What can you tell us about this partnership?
Yeah, it's really important work. It's really important work because of course, the policy it creates, but because of how it reinforces the importance of the ecosystem, the housing ecosystem, looking across, working together, and making it a priority to not just be in our bubbles and not just fight for our brief. One of the worst things that can happen at a time when things are tough, when implementation is really stressing everybody out, when maybe there aren't as many dollars available, is that everybody sort of retreats into the complexity and the hard work and like the doing in each of our spaces, and we sort of and we get back into our bubbles, and doing this work in a coalition, in a way that really acts as the kind of change that we need to see. We need housing solutions that are reflective of Canadians, no matter where they're at. no matter where they're at in in their lives and in their life trajectory. And there have to be doors there for you, whether you're facing housing insecurity, or you're in transition, or you want to live in a co-op or not-for-profit community, or like you need like an affordable, safe, great place to rent, or maybe you want to buy your first home in affordable home ownership. All of that has to be really, really strong. So this work for all of these organizations to dedicate time to not just write their own policy brief and do their own advocacy, but to get together as part of an umbrella and to say there's no one solution here. We need to build a strong continuum, because otherwise we're going to get it wrong. And I'm very excited about Tim Richter led the charge this time around with CHRA. And very excited about the work, very impressed by the caliber of the work and the commitment of the partners to come together at this very challenging time. And I don't know when the actual package is coming out publicly, but I know it's soon. And as usual, as per usual in these things, I trust that this group is putting a package together that is bold and courageous, and whether the price tag is large or not, which I imagine it will be, but that's what's required. That's what's required in the crisis that we're in, and we need to confront just the how big this challenge is, and the fact that that we need to take it on, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen, over many years, over decades. But we have to know where we're going, right? So that we can, take the right steps along the way and just stay on track and not lose track from our mission in terms of building a strong ecosystem. I know there will be lots of really good detailed work. I'm looking forward to checking out a couple of the chapters. One is on I'm hoping to see sort of a call for the next generation of a Canada housing benefit. Canada took a first step in the 2017 National Housing Strategy with Canada Housing Benefit. It was a foundation. It was a foundational investment. It brought in a whole new policy mechanism and framework. A lot of the work around implementation was done in collaboration with provinces and territories, and it was a start. It was a start that's making, and I shouldn't say that, because it's actually not fair to say good first step, because the Canada Housing Benefit is actually creating really, really important investments on everything from rent banks. Municipally, which are lifelines to prevent homelessness, to supporting, housing first programs, which we know are, like that's job one when it comes to the housing strategy is to make sure that we eliminate homelessness across Canada, and the portable housing benefit is absolutely at the core of that. It's also, just allowing municipalities and provinces to just look at different models for how we provide affordable housing to different populations. But it can be so much more. And as somebody who's been following, how housing benefits can complement the supply conversation, we can set a goal of eliminating deep core housing need by providing portable housing benefits to Canadians so that they don't pay more than half of their income towards rent. And that's entirely possible to do. It's entirely possible. Like, we could set a goal to eliminate core housing need in Canada over the next 5 years by investing in portable housing benefit. And and it's entirely within reach. It's entirely within reach. And so I'm hoping that we will see something bold and courageous on the housing benefit. And of course, I'm also hoping that alongside just a continued push to build, to scale up nonprofit co-op housing, to scale up access to affordable rental, that we will balance out the role of home ownership and bring in some some policy ideas that can lead to further leadership on that front. Very excited about this work. I can't wait for it to come out.
I think we're going to have what I'm going to do. I saw it last week on Housing on the Hill. They showed us that I think there's 5 big pieces, but I'm going to see if Ray and some others from CHRA can join us to just kind of walk us through it and talk about. I think it's important for people to see it. So excited for that. My final question to you: what are your hopes for the future for Habitat? Like, if you're looking down the road 5-10 years, what are your hopes?
So, I mean, at the core of our work, the magic really happens with our affiliates, right? Right now, we have 45 affiliates, and they really anchor the work of Habitat. And it's very much, it's grassroots, it's community-based, it's bottom-up. Our affiliates are literally building change that you can see, and it's change that lasts, right? Working with families. And the beauty of that is that you have you have sort of like a presence in every region, in every corner of Canada. The challenge is, of course, that every corner and every region is different, operating under different policy environments, often like municipal or regional or provincial, right, or territorial. And so how is it that we ensure that we have a very vibrant network across the country, where we're supporting each other, and where that action from the ground up is strong, is resilient, has the tools, the access to finance mechanisms that can really ensure that we continue to provide solutions from the ground up. So having a very vibrant cross Canada movement for affordable home ownership is really important, and at the core of our work over the next 5 years. Part of that is ensuring that we allow ourselves to experiment, to open ourselves up to innovation, to asking questions about what do we need to do next, right? And how is it that across the country, with so many affiliates in so many different contexts, how can we try out different things, create safety nets, so that learning and experimentation can draw results, can draw learning, and how is it that we use that to create new playbooks, right, that we can scale across the country? And that innovation agenda is really important. It's hard when you have organizations that are just like, they're fighting every day, right, in a very tough environment, to just keep things going. And how is it that we force ourselves to also create bandwidth to say, we got to keep the core business running. We have to fight for it. We have to make it happen. At the same time, we also have to imagine what's next, right? And how is it that we learn from that? And finally, I think that there's a lot about affordable home ownership that we need to know more about. In terms of what are the long-term positive impacts of building equity? How is it that they help with labor force attachment and labor force outcomes? How is it that they help with intergenerational equity? How is it that they help build more inclusive communities? And I think all of these are really important policy and research questions that we see every day. But that we can roll up into knowledge that I think can be helpful for society, for policymakers, and crafting that research agenda, leaning into it, looking at other dimensions of our work is going to be really key over the next 5 years, because new solutions are going to have to come from every place, and it's our responsibility to sort of elevate our thinking, elevate what we're learning, and to give policymakers really good ideas about how they can help Canadians in this country be the kind of place that we are really proud of.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you mentioned that. We just recently did a podcast with government relations folks, and we were saying that everyone always thinks that government has or should have all the answers, and government has the finance and the power to create policies, but we've got to give them those answers. And I think with leaders like yourself and so many other very talented people across the country. It gives me great hope moving forward. I can't wait to see what Habitat does in the next 5 years under your leadership, and with people like Ian Underwood and Josh Bernard and so many more that are doing incredible things. Pedro, thanks. Before we go, people want to check out the work you're doing. Where do they go?
Well, they can go to our website. They can check out our socials. But if you really want to learn about our work, go volunteer. Go volunteer at a restore in your local community, or find a build and like give back, build community, and like really get to know the Habitat magic.
Yeah, and so people understand too, you really don't have to have skills, right? The Habitat team guides you, you help out. It's kind of challenge by choice. And at the restores, I mean, they rely on volunteers to do incredible work. I had the opportunity to visit the restore in Toronto. Incredible stuff. Like, why go anywhere else? Go there, because not only are you going to get incredible and high quality products and service, but you're going to also give back so other Canadians can realize the dream of home ownership, right? Get involved for sure.
Oh my God, let's record that, Michael. That was great.
Listen, thank you so much. You're a busy guy. Thank you for taking the time. So glad you are in this sector once again, and you're continuing to make a difference no matter where you are. But I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us on the way home.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Michael, for having this podcast going on. In addition to everything else you got going on in your life, because it just it provides new windows into this issue for so many of us. So thanks for your leadership.
We'll talk again soon.
Cheers.